Yeah, we've done it for a year and a half now. We can do it another hour.
I think we can all just, I think we all, okay. Welcome everyone to the September 23rd, 2021 Clemson Police Advisory Board meeting. We'll start off with roll call from my left to right.
Kevin Dahl.
Eunice Lane Locker.
William King.
Margaret Thompson.
Jeffrey Roberts.
Ryan Dean.
All righty.
Madam Chair, for the record, Ms. Thompson and Ms. Robinson both contacted me and had either work or other conflicts, and that's
Yes,
why
sir, I
I'm here
saw
today.
that. Thank you, sir. I move that we make a motion for the approval of the agenda,
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
seconded by Mr. Roberts. Thank you. All approved, raise your right hand. Item 4, approval of previous meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the August 2021 minutes.
Second.
Second.
Kevin, seconded. All 4 against. All approved. I'll get it right. All righty, now we're moving to number 5. Now, under the citizens' comments, we never did come up with a time, so.
So per our city ordinance, during citizen comments, citizens have 3 minutes to present. If they need more than 3 minutes, the board has the right to vote to extend an additional 3 minutes if necessary, or ask the person to conclude their comments and remove themselves from the podium. So unless you want to change that 3-minute threshold, what you can do, you just need to make a motion to change that procedure for these meetings. And if it's voted up, we'll just give that amount of a lot of time in the future.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we adhere to the city council 3 minutes unless more information is needed.
So since it's already in ordinance, I don't think you need to.
Okay, you don't? All right, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
We'll just adhere to what's in city ordinance, and if you want to alter, go away from what's in city ordinance, then you would make a motion to go away from it.
Now, at this time too, is there anybody on the phone?
Not at this time.
Thank you, sir.
There's a slot delay that we want to get.
Now, if somebody calls in during this time, we're okay at taking the call? Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Especially if they want to comment on one of the agenda items.
Okay. Since there's no one on the phone and there's no one here to speak, we'll move on to number 6, department status, and that will be the chief.
Yes, ma'am. So currently, I have 3 officer vacancies. Last month, we lost an officer to the university police department. He aspires to continue his education, and by being a employee of the university, there's some incentives, monetary incentives to take classes there. So that was his decision to leave. I had personal conversations with him. He was very torn because he really enjoyed working for us. But he aspires to continue to ascend in the profession and wants to get his additional degree. So I wished him luck and told him if he changes his mind and wants to come back, we'll gladly hire him back. He's one of our better employees. So
Who was it that?
Stephen Kennedy. He's rather new. He's under 2 years, but very, very sharp, very athletic, very. He aspires to be a chief of police one day, so he's getting more degrees. So good for him. I have 1 dispatcher vacancy. We conducted interviews on Tuesday. I think they're getting close to giving a job offer to one of the persons that they. I should say they. I'm letting them choose. I'm the one that's going for the job offer to them. And we are proud to announce that our SRO is a new parent and is out on leave right now. She was born yesterday, so congratulations to him. And while I'm doing that, she's not out of work. She's still here, but she's a new grandma. And she'll gladly show you pictures if you want to see them to Miss Green. This past month, we finished up issuing out all the tasers. We conducted training. Everybody's been trained on the new Taser 7, so they all have them now. We also received and installed all of the vehicle GPS units. So We can keep track of where all of our vehicles are at all times. Our dispatchers mainly use this to see where the officers are in relation to the calls that are coming in, and can more efficiently dispatch the correct unit that's closer to the call. It also gives us, for officer safety reasons, we're not always able to get out on our two-way radios, and so you cut in and out a lot. And if we have to start looking for you, at least we know where your car is, and we know where to start looking for you at. So there's a lot of positives to that. It ties into our fleet maintenance. As a matter of fact, I got some alerts this week of one of our vehicles that has an engine issue, and it's alerting us as to what that engine issue is, so we can get it in and get serviced before it does something worse and cause more damage to the engine. So it's already starting to pay off. All of our officers have been issued department cell phones now. It seems kind of taken for granted that organizations give folks their phones, but especially in our community where most of our college students communicate differently than the rest of us, you almost have to have a device to be able to communicate with them, text, whatever, use some of the other apps. So that's part of the reason for giving them the cell phone. The cell phone, we also have an app that links with their body-worn camera, so they're able to categorize their videos and do these things before they upload. So it's just helping them. And additionally, we purchased 5 licenses for an application called Age ID, which I have on one of our cell phones here, and I can show you, but it's being used to detect fake IDs. So I told you before, and you'll see when we do the crime report later, we're getting a lot of minors in possession, and a lot of folks with fake IDs, and the fake IDs they're getting from overseas look almost identical to a real ID. It's hard to tell just by looking at the surface that it's a fake ID. This application scans the ID and compares the information to a database that this vendor has, and it tells you whether it's a valid ID, whether the ID is expired, or this is valid information for the person that it's reporting to be of age. Look at it a little bit closer, verify it a little bit closer. We deployed them out, and they're working very well. We actually showed this app to a lot of the bar owners and businesses when we had the annual meeting with them, and some of them have already instituted it in their screening process to get into their establishments. And the feedback I'm hearing is it's working very well. So they're able to detect a lot of these quicker. The building is moving along. We just this week moved, or actually started last week, moved our dispatch to a back part of our older building so that they can demolish and renovate the dispatch area. So that occurred. We were thankful to our IT staff, Lowell, Rick, and a new gentleman whose name eludes me right now, who worked tirelessly to put all of the infrastructure in, the wiring, getting all the servers moved, all that kind of stuff, so we could move them to that other location and then move them back. So it went very smoothly because of all their pre-planning. The new building is closed in the back, and they have knocked the walls open to connect the two buildings together, and the air conditioning is on in the new building. They're trying to get the finishing touches and moving for getting a temporary CO so that we can move staff into that building so that the older building can start to be renovated where it needs to go. So a lot of moving around, a lot of people dislodged, a lot of people working in temporary offices. My detectives are having to share space with where the patrol officers normally work. So it's very challenging for them, and they're still able to do their job. So I'm thankful for their patience. We established the foundation account with the community foundation, so it is now up and running. So we can start fundraising again for our community fund. I know that in the past there was a golf tournament that was held where a lot of those proceeds went into that fund. So now that the fund is established, we can move forward in doing a golf tournament in the future and some other events. The money from that fund goes to pay for, we buy gifts for the less fortunate during the holidays and meals for folks during the holidays. It also goes towards supporting our officers if they, for some reason, come into need, either through a death in the family, God forbid, or somebody gets seriously ill. I have a lot of very young officers that don't have enough time to have leave protections if they've been here. So sometimes if they have some kind of medical issue or something that goes on, they don't have the same kind of protection. So this fund's there to kind of help them out, move them along. You know, the more stable things are at home, the better employee, better production we get them out of work. So the fund's there to kind of help them out. So if you know of anyone who's willing to donate money to that fund, please get with me and I can direct them on how they can do that. Along those lines, I did have a local, one of the fraternities here offer to make a donation to the department, and what we're going to do with the money they're donating is we're buying dry fit shirts for all the officers and the staff, and we'll have a design on it that basically says CPD family, and they can wear it as an undershirt under their uniform, or if they want to wear it out somewhere else, they can do that. So we'll be getting those out to them here shortly. I got an email today saying the shirts are ready, so we'll go pick them up here shortly and hand them out. We got a couple of grants in. Recently, the Department of Public Safety body-worn camera grant came in. We got a little over $10,000 for that, so we'll be replacing the rest of the older body-worn cameras that we've had to the newer body-worn cameras. And the grants from the South Carolina, they call them Smith and Smurf. It's like an insurance liability through the Municipal Association for the state. They offer different grants for different projects, and so we put grant requests in for body-worn camera tasers and Department of Security. So while we're redoing the building, we're trying to put the key fobs or electronic fobs for entry into the building, so it logs who's coming in and all that. So that will go towards that. And I believe that is it for the department status. Any questions on that? Seeing none, Madam Chair, if you're okay, I'll move on to the crime review.
Yes, sir.
All right, so up on our screen we have our presentation. This is the August crime review and traffic report. In August we had 5 assault and batteries, 3 domestic violence, and 0 sexual assaults or robberies. Warrants were issued in all of the domestic violence calls and investigations that we have, and arrests made in all but 2 of the assaults, and in those 2 cases the victims declined prosecution. 5 malicious destruction of personal property, 20 larcenies, 8 motor vehicle thefts, 8 motor vehicle break-ins, and 2 burglaries. Of note here, a reoccurring theme, 40% of the motor vehicle break-ins involved force to enter the vehicle where they broke the window. The rest of them were all unlocked. We made 2 arrests for burglary, and investigation continues in one of the incidents. Traffic report for August. We did 9 hit and runs, 7 driving under suspension, and 8 DUI charges. We issued 32 speeding tickets, 8 disregard for signal, which is running a red light or a stop sign. In one of those cases, we installed, and I may have reported it in the last month, but we installed stop signs at Karen and Blue Ridge? I think it's Blue Ridge. Because of the traffic patterns there, we had an individual that wasn't even stopping for the new stop signs. They were caught on video. That video was provided to us. We deployed officers out there, and sure enough, went right through the stop sign again without even touching their brakes. So they were issued a citation. We had 6 DL violations, vehicle license violations, 20. Those were tag violations, operating uninsured, open container in a vehicle, and possession of fake false ID, 86 in August. 86 false IDs. 52 total collisions reported for the month of August. Other crime, we had the 89 possession under 21, and we did 15 possession of drug paraphernalia charges. So one of the things that you'll see here from time to time, and we don't really break out for you, is we have our officers are attuned to drug use and abuse, and they have certain areas where they'll patrol to detect folks primarily with meth or something like that, and so we do get a decent amount of meth cases. A lot of the times there is meth use within the city of Clemson. It's not prolific, I would say, but a lot of times we get people traveling through Clemson, going from one community to the other, and they also will stay at some of the hotels and motels here in town, and that's where a lot of that activity is coming So here I wanted to show you, just in August, this does not include September, all of the minor in possession charges that we made at these different locations. You can see here, Sunoco is in red. That is the Sunoco that's right here next to City Hall on 76. And then Tiger Mark, which is around the corner up on 93. We have Tiger Town Tavern and It's Your Wiener. Now, both of those establishments I heard have instituted that new age ID, and I have not gotten all the information back for this month, but I'm hearing through the grapevine that it is working. TD's, this says 6, but I know at TD's last month we had one night where I think we pulled almost 15 out of TD's. And I think shortly after we did that, we had a conversation with them and they've instituted that app. So I'm waiting to see what the results are as a resulting of employing that app. Any questions about that? So what I just will hit real briefly a couple of things that we'll present potentially next month is the report of the shooting that occurred downtown. This was Friday night, Saturday morning, right before the football game. We had an officer who was half a block away around the corner. The actual shooting occurred on College Avenue at the intersection of Earl. Is that right, Deborah? Am I getting the street right? Yeah. So just south of Earl on College Avenue. We had an officer around the corner at back streets, heard the gunshots, ran directly there, and when he got around the corner, anyone that was involved in the shooting had fled on foot. So nobody stuck around, nobody got hit. The window of the storefront got hit and shattered, and one of the cars that was parked there got hit, and that was it. Everybody else was gone. Nobody stuck around to talk to us, tell us any information whatsoever. Our camera system that records down there did capture people ducking and running, presumably around the same time that the shots were heard, but everybody's blurry and can't identify anybody. And by looking at it, we don't, sometimes even if it's blurry, you can look at somebody walking and say, oh, that's so-and-so. We're looking at it, we don't even see who that is. So the only information we have is from mostly college students that were in and around the area when they heard the shots and looked up to see what was going on. And we got very vague descriptions of a black male running this way. And even then, nobody saw who shot. So the black male that was running could have been running from the shots just not to get hit and wasn't the intended victim. So we don't even have that kind of information. So we're still following up on it. We have some leads that we're following up on. But that's all we have at this point.
Was a projectile found or anything?
We have shell casings that were found, were processed, and we will take them to Columbia and put them in NIBIN to see if, and all NIBIN will tell us is if that shell case, the weapon that fired that shell casing was used in another crime that's been entered in the NIBIN. But at least it's something. So if the firearm is recovered or there's another shooting somewhere and those shell casings match, then we potentially have a lead to follow up on to see if the person who had that firearm was involved in this shooting.
Do you think the camera system needs to be improved?
We were talking internally. I'm not quite sure if the cameras need to be improved or if we need to increase lighting there. So, the clothing store that's in that strip there, MH Frank, has an awning, and the next building has an awning, and it shadows the street lights, but MH Frank has lights in front underneath the awning. Well, when you're watching the video, you can see the lights turn off, and within 5 minutes or 3 minutes of the lights turning off, then the shooting occurs. So anybody that was standing in that area, because the lights went off, you can't see anything well enough to make an identification. And the other thing I'll point out here is we don't have a victim. So if we don't have a victim, we don't have a charge of attempted murder or aggravated assault or anything like that because nobody's come forward as a victim. So the worst case scenario, all we have here is damage to property, to the vehicle and to the storefront where the window was busted out. So that also limits our investigative abilities because you can't get search warrants for misdemeanors when you're doing these cases. So that kind of ties our hands a little bit more. So if a victim doesn't come forward, it kind of limits some of our investigative capabilities. Any questions about that? Okay. I think the next thing on the agenda is a presentation on domestic violence. I know one of the, Mr. Dahl had asked some questions about domestic violence, and we decided to put this on the agenda to hear the ins and outs of domestic violence. So I'll ask our victim advocate, Deborah Shockley, to come up and to help, or to give her presentation. So let me get this.
Good evening, everybody. I think I know most of you. For the ones who have never saw my face in person, my name is Deborah Shockley. I'm the Victim Services Coordinator for Clemson Police Department, and I work full-time there. I do that and the crime analyst position. Sorry, I will try to keep this on, but if I get too hot, I'll have to take it off. I apologize. So I was asked to do a quick presentation on domestic violence.
Deborah, if you're
If you know nothing about domestic violence, our state habitually ranks in the top 5. I've been doing this for 15 years. We went back and forth, but we're always in the top 5 of partners that are killed by an intimate partner. That's a horrible place to be in the top of in the United States. I personally have, we have different councils that are trying to address and trying to come up with comprehensive plans, because you can't just address one side and not the other and expect results. So I just wanted to start basically just going over exactly what domestic violence is, how our agency responds to it as far as law enforcement, how I respond to it as the Victim Services Coordinator. This comes kind of at a really good time for us because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Historically, we participate in a silent witness ceremony at State House stairs. However, we have not done that in the last 2 years because of COVID. I'm normally the one who goes. I take care of my elderly father, so I have to be very careful in what I'm exposed to and not exposed to. You guys, hopefully you can see the slides. I do have handouts where there's a couple that, I'll have a handout to give you because it is kind of hard to read the print. So the definition in our state of domestic violence is to cause harm or injury to a household member. That's definition number 1. Number 2, the second part of domestic violence is to offer or attempt to cause that physical harm or injury. If you make that threat, it has to be paired with imminent peril, meaning I'm outside your house, I'm going to be there in a minute and I'm going to kill you. If they're in the area, they absolutely have that ability to carry it out. So that would fall under domestic violence in our state. The difference in domestic violence and assault and battery is basically the relationship. So the relationship between the offender and the victim, if it is a household member, meaning a spouse, former dating partners that live together, people who have had children together, it would fall under domestic violence statute, and all of our rules and laws regarding domestic violence would apply in those cases. All other cases, like me and my friend got in a fight downtown, that would all fall under assault and battery. So the main difference in those cases is going to be the relationship of the offender to the abused. We have in our state multiple degrees of domestic violence. I don't know if you can see the slide. I do have a
this one
handout.
or next one? Next one.
I do have a handout because it is where he pulls it up. It's going to be kind of hard for you to see that far away. You want to take a look.
Thank you.
Sorry, you know, pretty color.
Uh-huh.
Color ink color.
Purple's a domestic violence color, isn't it?
Thank you.
So basically, this is differing degrees of domestic violence in our state. It's kind of weird because the way that our system works is the bottom of that pyramid is titled DV third. So that's domestic violence third degree. That is our less offense. So that's going to be a simple assault or the threat of injury. And then we go up from there. So we go from 3 to 2 to first degree. First degree is going to be the most severe out of those degrees, okay? And then the very top, we've got domestic violence, high and aggravated. So underneath each one of those, you will see different things that have to occur for those statutes to apply. So for DV, high and aggravated, so domestic violence, high and aggravated, there has to be extreme indifference, great bodily injury resulting from it. DV first is going to be involving a firearm or anything like that. Domestic violence, second degree is going to be moderate bodily injury and violation of a protective order or a prior domestic violence. DV third, there's no prior that has to be involved, there's no weapon that has to be involved. These things range from 90 days in jail. DV, high and aggravated, they're looking at up to 3 years in jail. Does that make sense? Okay. So when we get a call, when a call comes into law enforcement that there's a disturbance or a couple is fighting, something is going on, it is our procedure for 2 officers to respond. That is for officer safety. Generally, domestic violence calls are going to be the hottest calls you're going to go on. Generally, everyone's upset. It's very high energy. It's very high anxiety for everyone involved. So we ask for 2 officers to respond for their safety. They will immediately separate the parties. Their primary thing when they first get there is safety. So it's all about getting everyone separated and getting everyone safe, including themselves. They will interview the parties involved. They will interview any witnesses. They will interview children, if children are present. If they're old enough and saw something or were in the room or heard something. They will, while they're attempting to try to identify that primary aggressor, they'll collect evidence, they'll take pictures, they'll look at the victim to see if there's any manifestation of injuries. They'll do all of that. They'll also, while they're on scene, they'll speak directly with the victim if they're able to identify who is the victim in the incident. They'll give them their victim information form, as well as a packet that gives them a ton of resources that are available to them. And we'll go over all of that in a few minutes. If they are able to determine a primary aggressor, they will prepare a warrant and submit it to our municipal judge for signature and then to be served, and they'll also create an incident report. Just a side note on that, all law enforcement officers receive domestic violence training at the beginning of becoming a police officer. So at the police academy, that's all included. But on top of that, our department makes sure that they receive at least training annually on domestic violence alone. We do have a department general order and policy that addresses domestic violence, our response to that, and exactly the steps that the officers should take. Another tool that our officers have that not every agency has, we worked with the solicitor's office, Safe Harbor, Mary's House when they were still operating, and created a DV crime scene checklist. And it is exactly what it says. It is a checklist, and it tells them exactly what to do, what to look for, what to take pictures of, what to document, and how to document it so that they can have the most successful case criminally that they possibly can. Important things to note on the arrest and warrants. Used to be in our state, and 13 other 26 at one point states, there was something called a mandatory arrest law when it came to domestic violence. And what that law said was if you get a call to a domestic violence situation, you have to, as a law enforcement officer, make an arrest. Okay? That had its perks. It had a lot of good science and good studies behind it. However, what the state here saw, as well as other states saw, that having that mandatory arrest caused problems. And it honestly caused more problems than not having the mandatory arrest. I mean, some of the problems that we were seeing as a state were victims would not call for help because they knew their offender was going to get put in jail. They don't want them put in jail. They just want to be safe for tonight. They just need them to leave for the night and come back. And with the mandatory arrest, they learned that because it's a cycle So they learned that and they just stopped calling. Some other reasons why mandatory was taken away. Statistics started showing that officers were unable to determine who the primary aggressor was because it was always her word versus his, so they were making dual arrests. That's only going to happen once, and they're not going to call ever again because they don't want to be seen as the offender. They don't want to go to jail and be punished for something that they were being a victim of. So now our law basically says that if a law enforcement officer must make an arrest if they see manifestations of injury, meaning their scratches, their blood, or anything like that, and what the victim's telling them correlates with those injuries, and the officer has probable cause to believe that those injuries were caused by the abuser. So it is not, an officer is not required to make an arrest if they cannot find probable cause in a case. When they're on scene, I talked briefly about what the officers do. As far as my role in domestic violence, each case is different. If they have if it's a repeat scene, if it's a bad situation, if it's a severe injury or any main injury, they will call me. I am on call 24/7. Luckily, thanks to my new chief, I actually have a backup. So after being on call 24/7 for 365 for 6 years, I now have a backup. So there's 2 of us, so we split it. So we're on call every 2 weeks, which is a wonderful blessing. But they will call us. We will go to the scene, do some de-escalation with them, some debriefing with the victims. We'll make sure they're safe. We'll help them get into emergency housing if that's something they need. There's funds out there called Department of Crime Victim Funds. There's compensation. There's emergency funds. So if an offender kicks in a door, we can get that paid for because we don't want them to be penalized for anything that they didn't do. If for some reason I don't get called out, I come in the next day, I go through reports, I immediately see what's going on, I see the reports, I immediately make contact. If I'm unable to make phone contact, I will get an officer to go out with me and we'll try to make contact that way. It's very important to me as a victim service provider that my survivors in this city know that there are resources and know that there is a way out. And it's my job to link them to it. So I try very hard to go through and make sure that that happens. If an arrest is made in Clemson, basically what happens is a bond hearing must be done within 24 hours. And it's done by our municipal judge. You may all know, so I apologize if you know the procedure. Bond hearing is not guilt or innocence. No details of the case are going to be discussed with the judge. Basically, the judge is going to look at the accused criminal record, their ties to the community, what the pending charges are, whether they're here legally or unlawfully, and they'll make that decision and do a bond hearing. In 99.8% of my cases, what is called a no contact condition, which acts essentially as a restraining order / order of protection, is issued in these cases by the judge. We contact the victim, make sure they understand that the bond hearing is going to happen. They have the right to be present. Whether they're present or not, I'm always there. And so they are notified before and after of what's going on. I meet with the victim. I'll do an order of protection if that's something they want. I do the paperwork. I take it to family court. I get a judge to sign it, give me a court date. I then make sure that the offender is served, prepare them for court, and then I go to court with them. So we do all of that for them and with them. The case then goes up to the solicitor's office for the criminal side of it. In our state, another thing that came to light as an issue was police officers were prosecuting domestic violence cases. And the state said, we've got to stop that. We've got to figure out a better solution. So now any domestic violence charge, regardless of the degree and the penalty, will go up to the solicitor's office. So the victims are then assigned an advocate with the solicitor's office, and we handle meeting and introducing, and a prosecutor from the solicitor's office will actually handle the trial of the case. The only time there is an exception to that is if the offender requests a jury trial, and at that point, if it's a DV third only, it will come back to our court. Our city prosecutor, Mary McCormick, which I'm sure you all know, will prosecute the case, and I will be with the victim and representing the victim during those proceedings. I thought Chief suggested, and I thought it was a really, really good idea, the next screen will say a closer look. And I talked about what it looked like in the best case scenario for a domestic violence situation. And it talked about, the victims were going to accept referrals for counseling and housing, and, an abuser is going to be arrested. They're going to be kept in jail on a surety bond, and everything's great. And in best case scenario, my victim's getting all the help they need, or as much help as we can get them. He suggested, what if we give you a case, an actual case? And I thought that was a wonderful suggestion. So I basically just pulled some case files. I'm not going to go into any names. Everything I do is highly confidential. So I can't give any names, I can't give any addresses, nothing like that can I discuss. So I apologize when I use words. They're going to be just because I can't release anything like that. So the first case I wanted to talk about, and this is going to be our best case scenario. And I use best case because there is no wonderful, there is no perfect answer. It's just the best we found works at this point. So in November of 2020, officers got a call for a disturbance that was called in by a neighbor. Only one person was on scene when the officers got there. It was a 31-year-old white male. The male stated that he and his girlfriend had gotten into a verbal argument and that it had gotten heated, was his words. He further stated that the girlfriend took their 2 kids and left their home. The officers asked the male to write a statement and he declined. Officers then obtained the female's phone number and called her. She said that she was at a nearby business with the children that she had left for their safety. So we had another officer respond to that location to meet with her. The female stated that they were formerly in a relationship and had lived together in the past. They had 2 children together. The female had allowed the male to stay overnight at her apartment downstairs on the couch because he was going to watch the children while she went to work early the next morning. He went to work, he went downstairs, went to sleep, she went to bed, she got up, got dressed to go to work, he was still sleeping on the couch. They started arguing, you have to be up, you've got to get up, you've got to watch the children. He went outside to smoke, so when he did that, the female told the officers that she was fearful because he had abused her in the past, she just never reported it. So when he walked outside, she closed the door behind him and locked the door. The male began banging on the door to get back in. The female told him she had a gun and told him to leave. Instead of leaving, the male kicked in the door. He forcefully took the gun from the female and tackled her to the ground. The male shoved that gun in the female's mouth and told her repeatedly that he would shoot her in the face right now. The female's mother luckily arrived at the time scheduled to give her a ride to work. She was her transportation to work. So as soon as he sees the mom pull up, because the door's no longer on the hinges, so he can see her pull up in front of the residence, he gets up and runs. He doesn't get up and run. The female gets up and runs. She grabs the 2 kids that are standing there watching all of this and takes them and leaves. Female's cooperative with law enforcement from the beginning. She's very cooperative. She asks for my assistance. I come out on scene. He's immediately arrested, of course. She gave every bit of documentation that she could. She gave us a written statement. She gave oral statement. She allowed for photos of the damage to the door. She allowed for the gun to be confiscated as evidence. She was completely cooperative. I met with her for about 4 hours that day. I did have to contact DSS. I am a mandated reporter. Anytime children are involved or see a domestic violence situation, I have to notify DSS. And I do tell my survivors that. I'm very upfront with them because I never want them to think I'm hiding because I need them to trust me. DSS actually responded to scene because of the gun being involved. They put a safety plan in place, left the children with the mom. Dad was allowed supervised visits. He was arrested immediately and charged with domestic violence 1st degree. He was given a surety bond and no contact condition was put on the bond. The male was able to make bonds and was released from jail a few days later. He then secured an apartment 2 doors down from the victim. The victim notified me immediately, of course, because she was terrified. I immediately notified court. I was told that that was not a violation of the no contact condition because he did not actually contact her. So what we did is, because she was cooperative with me, because she was taking the services that we had, I was able to get emergency funding secured for her, where she was moved that day immediately into a separate house. We were able to pay her out of her penalty fees for breaking her lease early. We were able to get her down payment on a new lease, as well as getting her water transfer and her power transfer. She's now working with advocates from the solicitor's office and helping pursue this criminal charge to make sure that he is penalized and held accountable for what he did. She and the children are all receiving counseling. So as far as my job is concerned, that's best case scenario. What I wanted to look at is that's the best case scenario, but there's a flip side of that. And the flip side is not something that most people see or that most people understand. Everybody sees or hears a fight and thinks, oh, an arrest should be made, oh, well, they should do this, or, you know, they should have had enough evidence to do that. So on the flip side of that, the officer, if you go to the scene, the officer goes to the scene, and you've got a victim who's uncooperative, they often lie. Just to put it bluntly, they'll often lie to protect their offender. They'll likely lie to the officer and lead them in a completely random goose chase that has nothing to do with the actual abuse that they suffered. We'll still call, even if they're unable to make an arrest. I will still make phone call attempts. I am often hung up on. They are often, often the victim in those cases is hostile toward myself and law enforcement officers. On a case study on that one, I'll go over real quick with you. So this is what I consider an unsuccessful case. This is what I consider a heartbreaking case because the victim is not going to become a survivor anytime soon. So this one was in February of this year. The officers responded to a local gas station in response to a third-party caller who stated that there was a female sitting next to the gas pumps bleeding. Officers met with the female who reported that she and her boyfriend had gotten into a verbal argument in the car. The male had attempted to stab her in the stomach with a large knife but was unsuccessful. He became even angrier at that point and punched her in the face with his fist when they came to a stop at the gas station. The male got out of the passenger seat, went around to the driver's side of the vehicle, and forcefully pulled the female from the driver's seat of the car. The male then got into the driver's seat and left the scene in the female's vehicle. EMS arrived, victim declined transport. Officers discussed my services, what I could do, that I could respond to scene. She declined my services. They did have enough to issue a be on the lookout bulletin. The car was located with the male inside it within hours in Anderson. So he was arrested. I started trying to make contact with the victim the very next morning whenever I came in and was made aware of what had happened. She did answer the call the first time. I told her who I was. She hung up. I tried to call again. She didn't answer. I was told that she could possibly be staying at a motel, in which the motel knocked on the room with an officer. No one called. Nobody came to the door. I left a note on the door. She finally did call me back later that day, begging me to let him be out of jail, to dismiss all these charges. He didn't mean it. He loved her. He was just drunk. He'd never do anything like that if he wasn't drunk. I advised her that court was going to do the bond hearing and what was going to happen. She declined to appear. He was given a surety bond and a no-contact condition. I tried to contact the victim after the bond hearing to let her know the outcome. She got angry at what happened, basically cussed me out, and hung up on me. I tried to call again to try to talk to her. She wouldn't have it. Next day, she did accept one of my phone calls. She stated for me to leave her alone. She did not want victim services. She did give me an opportunity, though, to at least say, if you need help, call Safe Harbor or 911. She did let me say that. 5 days later, I again attempted to contact the victim just to check on her. I do that with all my victims. I just like to follow up, make sure they have everything they need. She answered the phone, but told me that I had the wrong number. So 2 months later, all this goes on. I leave her alone. 2 months after the incident, I got a message from Central Police Department that she was involved with a domestic violence situation with the same offender and that she was asking for me. I immediately tried to make contact, called the number that they gave me. She never called me back. 1 month after that, I got contacted by the Anderson County Sheriff's Office telling me that she had been in a domestic violence situation with the same offender and was asking for me. Once again, tried to contact her. She wouldn't answer. Sent officers to the motel where she was, her last known address. She wasn't there either. She didn't answer. Sent officers to a shelter where she could possibly be residing. She wasn't there. 17 days after this, I got a call from the victim asking about his release again, wanting to know why she wasn't notified that he was being released. This was from an Anderson County case, so I tried to get answers for her, and when I tried to get back to her with the answers why Anderson County did not notify, she didn't answer. 3 months later, which is, September at this time, I talked to the sheriff's office, Leva. She said that she was unable to make contact with her either. Long story short, I was finally able to get her to agree to apply for order of protection because her dad apparently has some friends in law enforcement, and she was telling him that no advocates were trying to assist her, that she had begged for help, and that no one was trying to assist her. So I finally got her to agree to meet with me to do order of protection. She was supposed to be somewhere in Pickens County at a shelter. So I drove up there. When I got there, she was not there. I did get her to answer a call. She was supposed to come at 10 o'clock the next day. Once again, I'm there. She doesn't show up. I haven't heard from her in the last week or two, so I can't tell you her current condition, but I can tell you that this, to me, is an unsuccessful case. This is an unsuccessful outreach for myself because I was not able to get to her to accept services. And since our incident, there's been 2 others. So to me, that's what I would consider an unsuccessful case. So real quick, just to keep going. So resources that are available to all survivors, you're going to see we've got, Safe Harbor is the one that I generally refer all of my domestic violence victims to. They are awesome. They do counseling, housing. They help them get on their feet. South Carolina Legal Services as well. We refer a lot of my survivors to them. They will help them do permanent divorces, custody, things like that. There are also resources for offenders as well, like batterer intervention, pretrial intervention, alcohol and drug counseling, and free attorneys. I do not handle any of that. I am not involved with offender services at all. I don't make referrals or anything for that, but they are out there. So what can you do as a community member to support an abused family or friend? So basically offer emotional support. So you want to acknowledge that their situation is scary, not judge their decision. If they make the decision to stay, you can't judge them. You cannot speak bad about their abusive partner. You're going to lose them. You've got to be as supportive as you can be. Help them create a safety plan. I printed those out as well, and you're welcome to them. This is pretty much exactly what I do with my domestic violence victims, whether they're going to stay or not. And it just talks about packing a to-go bag, making sure you know where your important documents are at. Continue to be supportive with them. Offer to go with them to any service provider. Watching anybody go through this situation can be very difficult under any circumstances, and it's not always clear what the best way to respond is. We would say be supportive, do research on your own, and understand why people stay, because there are reasons, and understand how power and control operate in these types of situations. What do you do to support them? You can also offer them material support, such as help them identify a support network to help them. Store that to-go bag at your house if it is a family member or friend, so that if they do make that decision to leave, they've got a few outfits. They've got a few things there that they'll be able to leave with. Encourage them to ask for help from other service providers. Help them learn more about the resources that are available to them. If you happen to witness an incident of domestic violence in the public, first and foremost, your safety comes first. So if you see something or hear them fighting or whatever, make sure that you're safe. Contact authorities, immediately call 911. If you're far away and you can record it on your phone and you feel safe to do so, by all means do that. Just make sure you're safe and far away, and then when officers get there, you can turn it over to them and they can use that in their prosecution. If you're hearing noises through your wall of the apartment next door or rental property or anything like that, one option is the next day to speak to the survivor. Say, I heard some loud noises last night. Are you okay? Is everything going okay? They may talk to you and they may not, but they at least know that people are hearing what's going on. Never blame them, never ask them what they did to provoke their abuser. But most importantly, understand that you can't save them and you can't fix it. You can help, and that's all you can do. On average, this is a pretty alarming statistic, and it's very true in what I've seen in my last 15 years. On average, it takes 7 attempts for a survivor to leave a domestic violence situation. They stay for multiple reasons. I mean, a lot of times it's a cycle. They saw it growing up, so it's that cycle there. It's normal to them to be abused at home. They're afraid. They have shame to admit to people that they're being abused at home. They usually have low self-esteem, very little resources. A lot of times, and we see it a lot in Clemson because of our nationalities that we have here in the different countries that are represented here in Clemson, is their immigration status is often threatened by the abuser. If you turn me in, that's fine. I'll turn in your green card, or I'll get you arrested for being here illegally. They also love them. I mean, at the end of the day, they love their spouse just like we do, and they want to stay with them, and they want them to get help. That's it. You might have any questions? I know that was a lot.
Just one. So if you see abuse going on like that, how many times do you always see repetition? Every time you see it going on?
Repeat that. I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Well, what percentage, I guess, of the time, if you see that, do you see it happening again? Is it half, 50% of the time you see that abuse happening?
I'd say 70.
7.
Unfortunately, most of the victims, and it's the longer you stay in a jurisdiction, I was with Anderson City for 8 years, and then I came here, and the longer you stay, the victims learn you by name. And they're like, oh, you're the one that calls me all the time. Oh, you're the one that, because I've seen them so many times. And unfortunately, it's just the cycle, and it is truly that hard for them to leave that I'll see them repeatedly.
So are you asking her as a victim advocate, or when you say you, are you saying in the generalized you that how often do individuals witness domestic violence see the domestic violence?
General.
I think that's where it's going.
Oh, how often there's actual witness to it?
Yeah.
Like an outside witness? Oh, very rarely. Very, very rarely.
Usually the abuser, if they know that it got witnessed once, they'll be sure not to do it again, or that person or somebody else will see it.
Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood the question.
No.
Very, very rarely do we have an external witness or a third-party witness to any of it. We also have the neighbors call, and, can hear them yelling. The neighbors can hear them yelling and relate to the dispatcher. But other than that, we rarely have a third-party witness.
I tell you one thing that when I was in it, that I didn't know this had changed, but that we had to make arrests, because I can tell you numerous times we didn't know who to believe, so we just took both of them to jail.
Say it again, Margaret. I didn't.
When I was glad to hear that this has changed, that you do not automatically have to put somebody in jail, which it used to be when I was there, because a lot of times you go someplace and you couldn't differentiate who was right or wrong, so you took both of them to jail. And that's changed, so I'm glad to see that changed.
There's also been a lot of training on how to determine who the primary aggressor is, because there are circumstances where the victim is defending themselves and they're just as violent as the offender. And a lot of times the offender may not be violent right away, but they know how to push the buttons of the victim and set the victim off. So there's a lot of training to try to determine that, because of the extended abuse, the frustration the victim goes through sometimes, especially if they feel like they're going to be severely physically abused, their response immediately is very violent, because they're trying, that's a defense mechanism to prevent them from getting severely beaten like they were last time. So that training is very crucial to try to determine that. And a lot of people don't like to hear this. Most of the offenders are male. Most of the offenders are male. There are some female offenders, but they're very few and far between. So it sometimes can get a little confusing. So you really have to pay attention to all of the indications that you have there, the evidence that's on scene, and really do a good interview. And sometimes even look into police records and see how many times have we responded there before. because, you know, the officer that's there now may never made it to that address, or maybe it was there twice. But as a department, we responded there 19 times. So that's an indication of continued abuse.
How's Ozzy?
He's good. He's good.
Should have brought him. He'd have to wear a mask though.
He ended up with poison oak.
Oh,
Apparently
okay.
dogs can get poison oak. So.
Thank you, Deborah.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your
Good
time.
job.
I appreciate it.
Next item is the Daniel High School student vacancy discussion.
So I haven't heard from anyone yet. I have put some feelers out to solicit a high school student. My plan is to actually go to the high school and see if I can get in there. And the things that I'm finding, even the civic-minded kids are so busy and have so much on their plate, it's hard for them to add yet another thing to their plate, especially if they're involved in any kind of sport, any kind of band, any kind of extracurricular activity. It's really hard for them to squeeze it in there. So I'm going to go to the high school and see what we can do and see if we can get somebody there.
Thank you.
When you say I'm going to the high school, you're going to make an announcement, you're going to go to a
Well, I'm going to go
class?
talk to the guidance counselor, the principal, and get some guidance from there where we can solicit some of this. It might be something that I'm going to have to see how many people I get that's interested in making this kind of commitment. It might be something that we might have to rotate to get the participation, because a lot of them they can't commit to a year-long commitment.
Which would be fun. I'm not sure if Daniel High School still has the news program that they have.
The which program?
They, you know, like the news, right?
News, okay.
So maybe the month before you go there, you could have it be on news, just letting you know there's a vacancy on this board and officer
I'll ask.
so-and-so will be here on October 14th, and we're looking to offer 10-minute appointments for you to ask him about the job. And then if they could get permission to come and talk to you individually or in pairs or whatever. I know some, I don't know right now, but I know teenagers that are interested in criminal justice in their future, and it seems like this would be a good experience for them as well. And their teachers, you know, if you could get a faculty letter, get the principal to send a letter to the faculty and say, keep your ears open. You could attach, if y'all are okay with it, all of our names and numbers, so they don't, you know, maybe they'd rather talk to one of us.
Sure, great. I would say no to my number, not.
What did you say?
I would just prefer my name and number not to be on that.
I didn't hear him.
He doesn't want his phone number given out.
Oh, gotcha, okay.
Thank you. It's all right.
Before we go to open discussion, I'd just like to point out one thing. Our next meeting is October 28th, but the following two meetings are both on holidays. November 25th, which is Thanksgiving, and December 23rd, which is not a holiday, but it's right before Christmas. So you may want to consider changing the dates on those meetings or foregoing those meetings. But come January, the first meeting in January, some of your terms will be up. Some are just year terms, so we'll be going and looking for people to apply, and all of you, if you want to remain, can reapply to the council, and so we'll go through that selection process. Several of you that were appointed, I believe it's a 3-year appointment, and but some were taking over for some other terms that were done. I know the universities is a year, so just start thinking about if it's something you want to do or you want to recommend someone else. Start thinking about that. But more specifically, and we can hit it harder on the 28th meeting in October, is those last two meetings of the year, as to when and what would be a good place. I gotta know what those dates are going to be, because room space and this room space is, there's other meetings that are held in here, and I have to jostle and see if we can get in that schedule. If we can't, is there an alternate location that we can go to? So,
Just move it up a week.
Yep, just move it up a week.
Third.
so that for both November and December.
Sure.
I'd like to move we skip December. I'd like to move we skip the meeting in December.
Is there a second?
I'd second that.
Y'all have any discussion? Okay. You want to do both?
All in favor of skipping the meeting in December?
All opposed? So is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of 1? Okay. So I will look on the calendar, see if I can move it up for November, and I'll report back to y'all. So that would be November, my math isn't working.
Are we ready to move on to board members' discussion?
That would be November 18th.
I just one more thing, another possibility would be to go the week after Thanksgiving, since we're not meeting in December, that might spread it out a bit, so you could check both
So
of
that
those.
would be December 2nd.
And just with the student, if you're asking them, you're only asking them for half a year, essentially. You could put that in the advertisement that the faculty sent.
For those high school students.
Right.
So speaking of which, Ryan, do you have any attendance hurdles, because the school year ends in December? So if we have it December 2nd, you should.
I'm good. You don't worry about me. I'll work with you.
Okay. So I will look for November 18th and December 2nd, and I'll send out the availability.
Okay.
Any open discussion? Well, Madam Chair, if you want to adjourn, that's,
So, were we going to board members' discussion?
well, that's what.
Oh, I'm
that's what-
sorry, I
that's what we're
didn't.
on.
Go
Okay,
ahead,
so,
Mr. King.
go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a brief comment. I was sent another city resident a copy of a local publications editorial view page recently, and also a following letter to the editor. I mean, the editorial page initially started out comically, but then it proceeded comically with the failure of the Clemson Police Department to respond to a bear sighting. But then it went on to be, to other matters, and kind of accused the chief of having a lack of drive to address multiple issues, from speeding tickets to traffic backups at fast food restaurants on 123, and also the firing of gunshots downtown with no arrest and limited evidence. And I bring this up because, unfortunately, this article and also a subsequent letter to the editor the next day that was from someone who's not even a city resident or a Pickens County resident, they really appeared to try to undermine the trust and confidence in the department. I just wanted to make a public statement of a vote of confidence, for the management and organization and transparency since you took the job. I think certainly the board minutes clearly document progress and updates in the department, as well as that actions on major issues in the city of Clemson have been taken. And I just feel like I don't know if you all had read that local publication's information, but they also stated in there that there would be more to come that would be critical of the department. But I thought it was an unfair article and without documentation, so I just wanted to make that brief statement.
I only have one item. A citizen called and said that, you know how the neighborhoods have been blocked off in the past during football games?
Yes, ma'am.
They would like to know if that could be reinstated, because I drove for Uber this last week and they said, "Dadgum, we can go through these neighborhoods." So the caller that called me said they would like to see it be, and I have to agree with the caller. It's dangerous because these people are walking, and there's a lot of traffic in through there. So they're asking just to pass it on to you. Would you consider re-implementing?
So I'll try not to get in a very long description, but where it really boils down to is staffing. When they did have those people stationed at the entrance of those neighborhoods, we had reserve officers and part-time officers that staffed that. We no longer have that with the agency. And with the officer allotment that we have now, we barely can staff what we're staffing now during football games. So we have put signs up to deter it. We are working with TomTom, Google, Waze to block those neighborhoods out so that people will not be routed through there using their apps. So we're doing what we can to try to limit the traffic in those neighborhoods. But I also have to point out too, those are public roads. So we have to have a significant reason why we're going to limit access to a public road. And I know there's a lot of pedestrian traffic in there, and I know that, but that's throughout the whole neighborhood, and that's not something that we can, it is something we can make an argument to limit the traffic that's in there, but then there's a lot of other things that come into play. The people that live in there have visitors. How do we monitor who the visitor is coming in? They used to do some type of permitting, I'm told, a permitting process but just the logistics alone to keep track of who's coming in on this game versus who's coming in on that game and who belongs to whom and what, it's very, it can get very complex.
Why don't we have reserve officers in there? I don't
The
understand
reserve
that,
officers,
because they used to come
the
up-
requirements by the state to be a reserve officer requires a lot of training, and they don't get paid for it. And if
Right.
you have a full-time job, you're not getting paid for a lot of things that you have to maintain and keep up. So a lot of people, it's not
Can you
worth
do
it.
private? Can you do private?
I'd have to ask the administrator. There's some liability issues with that because you're having if we're talking about doing a security company or something like that, then who's going to pay for it? Is it going to come out of city coffers? Is the neighborhood going to pay for it? Because who's benefiting from it? Is the city benefiting from it, or is it the neighbors benefiting from it? It's a longer, ongoing discussion that we can talk about. And I'm willing to listen to ideas, but the reason why it's not going on right now simply is because we don't have the staffing to do it.
But will there be a reserve program?
We have a reserve program now. We're certified through the state to have a reserve program. It's just finding people who are willing to put the large amount of time required to maintain that certification.
I got a question for you on that real quick. The reserve program you're referring to, is that class 3 law enforcement officers? Or is
We
that
cannot
something
use class 3 for traffic direction or anything like that without a class 1 officer being with them.
Okay.
So if what I'm talking
I
about
thought they
is,
had to be in radio distance, or is that changed?
say again,
I thought they had to be in radio distance with the
they have to be
full-time.
within visual contact with them.
Oh, it's changed, oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
And you can blame, if you've seen nationwide, the reserve officers that have shot people accidentally
Right.
or thought they were tasing them and actually shot them. So a lot of the rules have changed to make sure that a class 1 officer is within sight distance of them.
Well, that definitely depletes the
It puts a lot of limitations on how you can.
exactly.
So as far as the reserve officer program, what's involved? Like, do y'all work with Clemson Police Department?
Well, that's the other thing too. Our reserve program, we require the reserves to work all home football games.
Okay.
And there are a lot of people who may be interested in being a reserve but don't want to work every single football game because that's where our greatest staffing need is during home football games.
Why would you require them to work football games if you don't have anybody anyway? Why wouldn't you want to pick them up for maybe other times?
So part of this is me recalling what I'm being told by my staff of how they have been used in the past. So a discussion moving forward of how we can utilize them, I'm willing to have. I haven't had anyone come forward saying they were interested in becoming a reserve officer, so I haven't really given it much thought about how we would move forward. But I do know the training requirements, especially since we're an accredited agency, they have to be trained the same as our class 1 officers, and that's a lot of training they have to stay up on top of. So all the in-service training that we have, they have to be qualified with their firearms and driving, just like our class 1 officers are. So they have to, and that's a lot of time. So some people just don't have that kind of time.
That's a surprise.
So the training is the same as class 1 law enforcement officer? Is what you're saying?
Not completely, but the bare minimum training is, yes.
So they're going to have to go to the academy?
You have to go to the academy to, I think it's limited officer class, I think it's called.
So they don't have them at these off-site campus, like, when I went back on the reserve at the sheriff's office, I went for, I forgot how many weeks down to Tri-County Tech at the Anderson campus.
Everything is done at the Law Enforcement Academy in Columbia.
That's the class 3 law enforcement officer stuff, which they've kind of.
No, I was
phased
talking about
out.
reserve, that's what I did. I went to an off-campus site and took it. How many officers are you short right now at the police department?
I have 3 officer vacancies right now,
Road officers?
road officer vacancies.
I'm surprised because the pay is a whole heck of a lot better than it used to be.
Well, we just, I didn't report earlier, but tomorrow closes the application deadline for police officer 1 and police officer 2. Police officer 2 is someone who's already certified. Police officer 1 is someone who's not. And we have a lot of good candidates in our candidate pool that we're getting ready to interview.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Amen.